Found this composite material down in these intake ports, as you saw in the video. I pulled these out with my hemostat, and it does just look like a piece of the plastic air intake system. Probably happened in the accident, since this engine was out of a salvaged van. My issue really is one piece is wedged between the valve and the cylinder head itself, and it won't just pull out of there. So looks like we're going to pull the heads on this motor. To me, this is definitely not like mechanical engine failure type stuff, but it has a rubbery substance. I can't help but think that in the accident, part of the intake got gobbled up. The air intake tube is what I mean to say. The actual composite intake itself seems to be fine. We'll pull the throttle body off and check it to be sure, but chances are they were, running, and this accident happened and it busted that plastic upstream, and maybe they went wide open and it pulled it through the throttle body blades. But I think that's what we've got the results of here, because there's no damage on the cylinder walls. It just looks like plastic or something that got in there, got brittle. Nothing metallic. Nothing sticks to the magnet, so it's good news. I just pulled off this other head. You can see some of the giblets here. Pretty good sized piece of burnt composite here. And interestingly, that piece we were trying to pull out of this passenger side head is pinned right there in that valve and a little bit melted, so whatever went wrong, it didn't go on for very long. No need in ordering our parts until we verify everything is good, and we don't need to order them. I like these old school like LS1, LS6 lifters were open on the ends and not fully encapsulated like this. These were the upgraded lifters that you would replace the early LS with the LS7 7-liter engine. That's what came with these. This was the early design LS lifter. It was open on the ends, and I had one that spun in those plastic trays and just ground a flat spot on the cam. Luckily, and I'm not sure how, just by the grace of God, all the needle bearings stayed in place, because they could easily fall out the end. And I did find this ear that was broken off down inside the lifter tray. So, good reason for the upgrade ones, but the issue was that somehow it hung up and turned, and which caused it to just sit there and grind flat on the camshaft. But yeah, old versus new. We're inside the timing cover of this LS motor. If many of you haven't seen it, this is what it looks like. So this is what's called the single bolt cam. And I guess we could pull that thing out of there right now if we wanted to after we remove this plate. Single bolt, dead center. This is a variable valve timing setup, so that's why we took that assembly off over there, and we'll probably end up with a timing cover that doesn't have all that gadgetry because we're going to delete that for our application. And here's the oil pump. Now, like on the old, like an LS6, you used to could just unbolt the pickup tube and kind of do your work as you wanted to. These aren't so great like that on these truck motors, etc. So that bolt right there is holding the pickup tube to the bottom of this pump. Now, why couldn't they use a bolt on this side instead, like, you know, somebody wise would do? I do not know, because it would be super simple to just pull this timing cover off, pull the screw out, take this oil pump off. I mean, we don't need to do this right now, but I figure if I'm going to do an LS teardown video, we might as well tear the thing all the way down to where it's just the short block. So this is our LS all torn down to where, you know, we basically just will replace this timing set, do the cam, start putting it back together. Got a bunch of parts to order now, more so than I'd planned on originally, because now we need head gaskets and torque to yield bolts, because in GM's infinite wisdom, they decided that they should all be one-time use. And, you know, even that massive crank bolt, which you usually get those with a cam kit, but you don't have to pull the heads off if you know how to carefully change out or raise up the lifters and hold them in place while you're changing the cam. Not an issue for us now because we've pulled all the lifters out. I realized I left this torque plate or cam plate on here, so I just took it off so you can see these holes actually run all the way down where the lifters are. You can kind of see that notch right there about halfway down. So if you want to change the cam without pulling the heads and the lifters, you can spin this cam gear and stick a dowel through here until it pins up all the lifters, and then you can safely pull the cam out without all the lifters falling all the way into the block, because that makes for a bad day. You know, since we're here, see if we can, I don't recommend this one-handing it because it can do damage to the cam bearings if you're not careful. They should be in there nice and strong and not come out easy. There we go. Stock 6.0 truck cam. Looks like that. So now we've officially tore it all the way down to the short block. Pan's even dropped down a little bit. Oh, looks like I'm bleeding. Anyway, that's the motor tear down. Unfortunately, we had to take it a little further than we expected to, but hey, bonus for you guys. So I'll be ordering parts, and just like that, the parts are here. So before I ended this video, I thought it'd be a really cool payoff to show you everything that we're going to use when we rebuild this L96. This is our valve springs that we ordered. Now, we did get dual valve springs. You'll see there's 2 of them in there. And this kit from Summit comes with the retainers and the keepers and the seals. And they're fairly inexpensive. I choose running dual valve springs over the single beehive because you hear oftentimes of the single beehive springs are actually the ones that'll be breaking. Whereas the dual valve springs kind of can do the low and the top end of the pressures and spread the load across 2 springs instead of trying to do everything in one. This is the variable valve timing delete kit. Comes with the gasket. It's the good gasket with the metal and the rubber. Comes with the bolts, seals already installed. Comes with an actual GM cam gear for the 3-bolt. Also the crank pulley bolt, the new, well, this is kind of the old style, it doesn't have the washer on it, but it's still the torque to yield. And then new cam bolts from ARP. That all came in one nice kit, which was handy. For our rocker arms, these are the stock ones. And this is our trunnion upgrade kit, which I'll go over the install of this. But essentially, if you look, the factory rocker arm just has this stamped steel cap holding where the needle bearings, that you can kind of maybe see them inside there. This trunnion upgrade kit basically will install these new bearings inside your rocker arm, and then they'll be held in place by snap rings on both the front and the back side. So higher RPM requirements are upgrading the trunnions. Stock lift and stock RPM, these, I don't think you can break one of these, honestly. You're gonna have to build a motor to justify this upgrade, but they're around 100, 120 bucks. It's cheap insurance, and we're probably gonna end up having a boosted motor in this application, so I wanna make sure that everything's capable and ready for that. This is our installation tool. Comp owns the company now, but this Powerhouse brand is actually the ones who came up with it. And we'll show you how this all works whenever we do the trunnion upgrade, but you'll see that magnet on one end is super handy for this tool. We talked about the one-time use bolts, which was kind of the bummer whenever we realized we had to pull the heads. You can buy one-time use bolts, or you can upgrade to the ARP bolts. I like ARP, they're pretty known in the industry. I didn't go with the studs. I like just the bolts. For our application, it's just fine. These are gonna be considerably stronger than stock, and they're also multi-use, so if we ever do have to remove the heads again, we can reuse these bolts. You'll notice they're a little bit longer than the stock ones, and that's because every one of these bolts has a washer that it sits on, which honestly helps a lot with getting your true torque numbers. Now, we could talk about push rods quite a bit. These are from Brian Tooley. I'm sure he's probably not making push rods. I'm not sure who makes them for him, but this is what a factory push rod looks like. You have the ball on the end. It's just a lighter steel. These are chromoly, and they are just basically rounded on the tip without having the ball, so there's nothing to potentially break off. These may be they're like brazed on. I've not seen one ever break, but I have seen these bent and damaged. Usually it's just improper use or improper installation, because push rods aren't something you have to worry about with a stock or mild engine. I always like to replace them if I have the engine apart, because they're fairly inexpensive in the grand scheme of things. We did not require or use a push rod checker. We're using the 7.4 inch and the 080 thickness. They're plenty strong for our application. Now, we're reusing the stock block, the stock heads, and the stock thickness on our head gaskets. Also, we're using the stock rocker arms. We're just replacing the bearing assemblies. So there should be no geometry changes whatsoever in our valve train, and that's how we know we can get away with running these stock length 7.4 inch push rods. If any of those things I just said changed in your application, you will need to get a push rod checker and order your push rods based on the length that the checker tells you they need to be. Head gaskets. There's a couple of options when you buy these. The cheaper of the two variants that are the stock thickness, which let's see, they're 4.1 inch bore and 54 thousandths of an inch thick. The cheaper of them will actually be made in China. They're about 15 bucks a head gaskets less, and they will not have any part number or any numbers printed right here on this tang that sticks out. You buy both from GM or AC Delco. This is what we consider an upgraded version. This part number 12622033. These are actually made in Germany, and they actually do have the part number listed right here on that tab. So these are 7-layer versus basically what a 5-layer is here, with the center thickness that's a little thicker. They're interchangeable with each other according to everyone, but this is what GM uses on like the LS9, a factory supercharged engine. So they know they're made to handle boost and a little higher pressures. So we went ahead and spent a little bit extra money and used the good head gaskets. Camshaft. This is the Elgin Sloppy Stage 2, it's pretty famous on the internet, and it should be, because it's probably the best all-around cam for street and performance. Actually a good turbo cam. The numbers are 228 and 230 duration, 585 and 585 lift, 112 lobe separation angle. I made a joke and wrote 3/4 race cam. Anyway, E1840-P. Now, because the lift on this is 585 on the both intake and exhaust side, that's why we chose valve springs that are just good to 600 inches of lift. What you don't want to do when you choose valve springs, let's say in our case, we wanted 660 lift springs, or that's what we bought because it sounds like they're more capable, but we only have a 585 inch lift cam. You're overspringing for this cam lift, which means you're creating more resistance in your valve train than you need. Now, we happened to luck out when we went into our parts store locally, and they had this guy sitting up on their counter. Now, this is the Holley high ram. It does come with the upper and lower plenum, comes with just the fuel rails, not the hoses and lines like the fabricated intake does. The neat thing about the high ram, well, we have good and bad. The good news is, if you go to a boosted application, instead of running a massive intercooler in front of your radiator or coming up with a way to plumb it, you can actually just use an air-to-water intercooler. I'll put an image on the screen. Basically, you just remove the top, put it between the upper and lower base and bolt it back together and plumb it to your cold water box with some type of circulation pump. If you're running like a stock height or a short injector, you can bolt the fuel rails in the lower position, or if you're running larger, longer aftermarket injectors, you can bolt it up higher. On the back, they have your ports for your manifold air pressure sensor and 3 additional screw-in ports, so in case you need to run vacuum or some kind of boost reference via pressure or vacuum in your intake. The bad news, the intake is actually detrimental versus a stock intake over most of the RPM range. At least this one is. It's considerably shorter runners than even a factory intake. I know a factory intake doesn't sit very high, but internally it's got the runners cast into it that go all the way across the bottom and halfway up the sides. These are actually shorter, which makes it good for higher RPM. So anything over around 5,500 RPM, this is going to make more power. And anything over 6,500 RPM, it's going to make a lot more power than stock. So what we're going to suffer, which 5 to 8 horsepower suffrage in the lower RPM range, this camshaft more than makes up for. I did get some of our parts out to the powder coater, and he'll get those turned around to us in a couple of days or a couple of weeks. I mean, we're not in a big hurry. We're going to start assembling this engine, and we'll go over most of that with you in our next video that you should see next week. So I'm kind of excited. I hope you guys are too. Appreciate you watching. We'll see you next week.